Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the podcast. $1.5 trillion. That could soon become the largest military budget in American history. But here's the real question. Would spending that much actually make the United States safer, or could it create new risks? The debate in Washington is heating up. Some argue the U.S. must rapidly expand its military to deter China, Russia, and emerging threats. Others say a sudden spending surge could overwhelm the defense industry and waste billions. So what's the smarter strategy? A massive one-time military buildup, or steady long-term growth like the Reagan era? In this video, we break down the strategy, the history, and what a $1.5 trillion defense budget could really mean for global security. If you enjoy deep geopolitical analysis, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone interested in global strategy. And now we want to hear from you. Should the United States spend $1.5 trillion on defense, yes or no? Drop your opinion in the comments and tell us why. This is one debate where every perspective matters.
And just before we really get into the weeds here, a quick note on how we approach these things. The latest updates we are looking at today touch on some, highly charged political proposals.
Yeah, definitely.
We are talking about the current administration, recent hostilities with Iran, the federal deficit. So we want to be absolutely clear with you right up front. We are not taking sides.
Right. No endorsements here.
Exactly. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints today. Our focus is strictly on unpacking the strategic concepts, the history, and just the hard facts provided in the latest info. We're just here to look at the mechanics of global security. Nothing more.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is really to figure out the fundamental mechanics of modern military readiness.
Right.
We are looking at a very specific debate. Is a massive sudden injection of cash into the military the most effective way to secure a nation? Or is a steady multi-year approach the true key to geostrategic stability in the modern era?
It's a fascinating dilemma. And to really grasp the weight of this debate, we need to look at the sheer magnitude of the numbers being proposed right now.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are. Based on the latest news, President Trump has asked Congress for $1.5 trillion for national defense. And this is specifically targeted for fiscal year 2027, which actually begins in October of 2026.
Right. And looking through the notes on this proposal, the sheer scale of that number is almost hard to process. For you listening, $1.5 trillion represents roughly a 50% increase over current defense budget levels.
A massive jump.
Yeah, a 50% jump in a single year. That is huge.
And what's really fascinating here is where that places us historically. Because when you adjust for inflation, a $1.5 trillion budget doesn't just, edge out previous records, it completely shatters them.
We're talking about eclipsing the defense spending peaks of the Reagan era, right?
Exactly. It surpasses the massive post-9/11 buildup under President George W. Bush. It leaps over the spending during the Obama administration. And astonishingly, it even exceeds the peak spending levels of World War II.
Wow.
Yeah, which is a conceptual benchmark that really puts this proposal into perspective.
But looking at the documents today, they do point out an interesting economic caveat to that World War II comparison.
Right, the GDP fact.
Exactly. The overall size of the United States economy, the gross domestic product, is vastly larger today than it was in the 1940s. So, as a pure percentage of the total economy, this wouldn't technically be the highest burden the nation has ever carried.
Well, while that is mathematically true regarding the GDP scale, GDP isn't the only metric that matters in defense planning. You really have to look at the immediate fiscal environment the government is operating in right now.
Like the deficit.
Yeah, the nation is currently running a $2 trillion annual federal deficit. That is the massive gap between what the federal government collects in revenue and what it actually spends every single year.
And stacking more on top of that is complicated.
It is. Layering a sudden, one-time $1.5 trillion defense boost on top of a $2 trillion deficit introduces massive questions about basic affordability. It forces a real conversation about whether borrowing that much money all at once actually strengthens national security or if it undermines the economic foundation that security relies on.
Okay, but wait. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Let's look at the history here. The United States has a very long track record of suddenly spiking its military budget, right?
It does, yes.
I'm looking at the notes on past conflicts, and we threw massive amounts of money at the military practically overnight after Pearl Harbor, and that massive sudden splurge won us the war.
Sure.
We did the same thing during the Korean War in 1950. The latest info even traces this exact pattern back to the War of 1812, the U.S.-Mexico War in 1846, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
If sudden spending spikes worked for all those major conflicts, why are critics saying doing the exact same thing today would be a total disaster?
Because you are comparing an industrial-era draft model to a highly specialized 21st century technological force. The very nature of manufacturing and warfare has completely changed. I mean, in all those historical examples you just mentioned, the nation was already in the middle of a hot, intense conflict. The primary goal of those sudden cash injections was just to dramatically expand the physical size of the armed forces as fast as possible.
They just needed raw numbers.
Exactly. They needed raw numbers, and they needed them immediately. Draft a guy, give him a uniform, send him out.
Going through these latest updates, one statistic really jumped out at me regarding that shift in how the military operates today. It noted that the average professional military personnel now serves 6 years in uniform.
Yes.
That completely shatters the old idea of just drafting a citizen, running them through a few weeks of basic training, handing them a rifle, and putting them on a transport ship, doesn't it?
Well, it completely invalidates that old model. Think about the training required to operate a modern radar system, or maintain a nuclear reactor on a submarine, or pilot a next-generation aircraft. That takes years of intense, specialized education.
You can't just cram that into a 6-week boot camp.
You simply cannot mass-produce that level of human expertise in 6 months, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. And that exact same limitation applies to the equipment.
Right, the manufacturing side.
Yeah, in 1942, the government could literally take a civilian automotive factory, retool the assembly line, and start churning out thousands of bomber planes or tanks in a matter of months. Today, the complexity of the engineering makes that kind of pivot impossible.
You can't just flip a switch and turn a commercial tech facility into a stealth bomber plant.
No, absolutely not. Or turn a civilian manufacturing plant into a facility that builds precision-guided munitions. It doesn't work that way anymore.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the goal isn't just a massive increase in raw troop numbers, what is the actual priority for modern strategists?
That is the core question.
Looking at the defense strategy laid out by recent defense secretaries, tracing all the way back to Ash Carter and Jim Mattis, the focus has completely shifted. They aren't asking for millions of new soldiers.
Right.
They are prioritizing technological sophistication, lethality, resilience, and survivability over sheer size. It is all about deterring highly advanced adversaries like China and Russia.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, strategists don't necessarily want a massive bloat in the 1.3 million active duty force. What they desperately need is precision, reach, and staying power.
They need the good stuff.
Exactly. To achieve that, they are asking for larger inventories of highly complex munitions. They need advanced missile defenses. They need nuclear-powered attack submarines. And crucially, they need command and control and logistics networks that can actually survive a sophisticated cyber or electronic attack.
So if they need all that incredibly advanced gear, wouldn't a $1.5 trillion check solve the problem? I keep coming back to this idea. If they need new submarines and new missiles, why not just give them the money to buy it all right now?
Because a massive one-time injection of $500 billion acts like a sugar high for the defense sector. It actually creates severe strategic risks.
A sugar high?
Yeah. The defense industrial base does not have empty factories, and thousands of idle aerospace engineers just sitting around waiting for a massive check to clear. If you flood the system with that much cash all at once, you don't magically get more submarines, you get a massive bottleneck.
That actually reminds me of an analogy. It's like deciding you want to run a marathon. So you try to eat 50,000 calories and run 26 miles on day one.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't going to get stronger. You're just going to break your system. You tear a muscle. The Pentagon needs to train for this kind of buildup. They need the infrastructure to support it.
That is the perfect way to look at it, and the supply chains are the muscles in that analogy. Modern defense contractors rely on incredibly fragile, highly specialized subcontractor networks. If you hand a major prime defense contractor an extra $10 billion tomorrow, they can't simply spend it efficiently. There might be only one or two factories in the entire country that produce the specific microchip they need, or the specialized titanium forgings required for a new submarine hull.
You can't just wish those into existence.
You can't magically conjure up those raw materials, and you absolutely cannot train specialized nuclear welders and aerospace engineers overnight. A sudden flood of cash just creates a massive traffic jam at those few specialized factories.
So if the World War II model of a sudden cash dump is broken, the documents we're reviewing point to a much better historical blueprint, the 1980s.
Yes, specifically the defense buildup under President Ronald Reagan and his Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger.
Right.
The 1980s offer a highly relevant parallel for today's geopolitical climate. The United States was facing serious geostrategic risks, and Reagan and Weinberger realized a massive increase in defense spending was absolutely necessary to modernize a force that had been hollowed out after Vietnam.
And they did increase it by a lot.
They ultimately increased the defense budget by roughly 50 to 75%. But the crucial difference between their approach and a sudden $1.5 trillion spike was the pacing. They spread that massive increase out over about half a dozen years.
Which resulted in an average year-on-year real growth of about 8 to 10%.
Exactly.
And just to clarify that economic term for you listening, real growth means the budget is increasing by that 8 to 10% after you've already factored in the cost of inflation. It represents actual, usable extra purchasing power for the military. And that specific percentage seems to be the absolute sweet spot for the defense industry.
It is the sweet spot because 8 to 10% is a pace of growth that the American defense ecosystem can actually digest. It is an absorption-friendly rate of investment.
It doesn't cause that traffic jam.
Right. It allows the money to be used productively to slowly expand factory floor space and train new workers, rather than just causing those supply chain bottlenecks we discussed. And just as importantly, Reagan didn't use that massive 75% increase to drastically inflate the size of the armed forces.
He went for quality.
Quality over quantity. The funds were strategically channeled into military pay, advanced training, equipment maintenance, and deep modernization.
Now, comparing 1981 to today, the latest info notes that we're actually starting from a stronger baseline in a few key areas.
Yeah.
Military pay and overall readiness are generally in much better shape now than they were back when Reagan took office.
Very true.
But the overarching hurdle remains exactly the same. Modernization is the critical bottleneck. The military needs to replace aging technology, and they need a smart way to pay for it.
This raises an important question. If a massive, sudden $1.5 trillion spike breaks the system, how do we achieve that necessary modernization?
What's the better way?
Well, the alternative path highlighted in the recent info suggests a model built on predictable market signals. Rather than a massive $500 billion injection all at once, the proposal advocates for increasing the defense budget by $100 billion annually for the next 5 years.
That 5-year timeline is very deliberate. It aligns perfectly with the Pentagon's standard budget projections. It gives everyone, from the generals to the factory floor managers, a clear, predictable roadmap. Let's be very precise about what that steady approach actually buys on the global stage.
Okay.
Starting with global defense networks. The latest updates point out that sustained multi-year contracts allow the defense industry to significantly scale up production of critical interceptors, specifically Patriot, Navy Standard missiles, and THAAD systems.
And the global demand for those specific interceptors is absolutely relentless right now.
Let's use THAAD as an example to illustrate the complexity.
Right.
THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense.
Right.
For you listening, imagine trying to shoot down a supersonic bullet with another bullet while both are traveling thousands of miles an hour in the upper atmosphere.
It's an incredible engineering feat.
The radar systems alone require incredibly specialized semiconductor chips. The interceptor missiles require solid rocket motors that can only be cast in a handful of highly regulated facilities in the entire country. You do not just build those on a standard commercial assembly line.
You need highly specialized facilities, and the U.S. isn't just building them for its own forces. It is actively supplying these exact same systems to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea.
Which takes long-term planning.
Exactly. A steady, predictable budget allows defense contractors to confidently sign multi-year agreements, knowing the funding won't suddenly vanish next year.
And second, there are precise geostrategic payoffs in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes. A predictable budget allows the military to purchase vast stockpiles of anti-ship missiles, which are heavily prioritized for any potential scenarios involving the Taiwan Strait. It also provides the long-term market signals absolutely necessary to expand the U.S. shipbuilding base.
You definitely don't build a multi-billion-dollar dry dock or a nuclear submarine shipyard for a 1-year contract.
No, the maritime industry needs a 5 to 10-year horizon to justify that kind of massive capital investment.
And finally, there is the push for next-gen warfare. A predictable financial runway allows strategists to prioritize advanced drones, not just for ground combat, but specifically for complex maritime conflicts.
And it signals to the aerospace industry that they can safely expand their floor space to develop long-range stealth aircraft and next-generation missiles.
So they aren't afraid of being left with empty new factories next year.
The bottom line for Washington is that steady, predictable increases consistently beat periods of feast and famine. The modern American defense industry cannot be repurposed for making civilian goods at the flip of a switch. It relies entirely on consistent, multi-year market-based messages to function.
It's an ecosystem.
Exactly. If the administration and the Office of Management and Budget don't prioritize this multi-year plan, the document suggests Congress will need to step in and rechannel any sudden spending spike into a strategic long-term blueprint.
So what does this all mean? When you strip away the politics and just look at the mechanics of the modern defense industrial base, protecting the nation in a high-tech era isn't about throwing a historic amount of money at the Pentagon all at once to see what sticks.
No, it's really not.
True deterrence requires steady, absorption-friendly investments. It requires giving the defense sector the predictable runway it needs to actually design, build, and maintain the complex tools of modern security.
It is a complete paradigm shift from the industrial wars of the past. The geopolitical ecosystem today requires steady, reliable nourishment, not a massive sudden shock to the system.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to explore on your own. If modern global security relies entirely on highly advanced, incredibly slow-to-produce technology rather than the rapid mobilization of millions of troops, are our traditional ways of measuring a nation's military readiness completely obsolete?
Are we still trying to judge 21st century power using 20th century metrics?
That is the question. Thank you all so much for listening or watching today. We always appreciate you spending your time with us exploring the complex forces shaping our world. Be sure to check out the other podcasts in our network for more deep dives. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.
Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.